Good morning, councillors. It is 9:04 and we will commence the 852nd round of the Planning and Regulation Committee. We welcome all of our committee members and our visiting members with us here today. I don't have any leave of absence requests to deal with, so we'll go straight to the confirmation of minutes. Is there someone that's happy to move the minutes of the 850th meeting, or 851st, I'd say that probably is? Move Councillor Doran, second Councillor Gates. All those in favour? Minutes are passed. Conflict of interest declarations. Councillor Gates, do we have one for 6.6 to start with?
Correct, and it relates, Chairman, to a donation or two donations from UPS, who are the town planning consultant on the item, and it was well outside the relevant term in 2014 and 15, $1,850. I have not discussed the matter with the applicant or consultants, and I seek to participate in the decision.
Councillors, I'm happy to move the procedural motion that, despite Councillor Gates' conflict of interest, that Councillor Gates should participate in the decision because the matter is minor remote, it's outside the relevant term, and that a reasonable member of the public would trust that the final decision will be made in the public interest. Do I have that's seconded by Councillor Peter Young. All those in favour of the procedural motion? Councillor Hamill, Councillor Young, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Martin, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Doran. Please record Councillor Gates did not vote. Councillor Gates, should we air the other one now and just have it out the way?
I think so. I wanted to ask the members of the committee how they felt about this one. I've prepared a declaration should it be required, but I received a $1,350 donation from a company called V Design in 2011. So it's 14 years ago. I've never been in contact with V Design since that time, nor have I had any contact with anyone associated with this final development approval. So if the councillors felt so inclined, I'm happy to present a conflict declaration, but it's really, I just lay it there for you to consider.
So, Councillor Gates has put it out there on the public record. Is there any councillor that has a question or feels the need for Councillor Gates to put a formal conflict on the record? So we now have a public record to show that. So Councillor Gates, if you're happy just to leave it at that, we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Very good. My apologies at the start too. I forgot to say good morning to all our officers, our assembled gaggle here this morning, and to our support staff, good morning, and of course to EGM Swain, good morning. So that's conflict of interest declarations out the way. I'm aware from conversations with committee members that there is an interest in unstarring items 6.3, 6.4 and 6.6, which means that 5.1, 6.1 and 6.5 are left starred. Can I just confirm if there's anything outside of that? Councillor Doran?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question with regards to something in the forward planning schedule. Happy to how we want to deal with that.
So I'm happy to take the question, we'll leave it starred and then group them up together. So your question on 5.1?
Is that in proposed in 854 on the 25th of March is an item with the subject C-Bus Stadium Traffic Management Plan for 2025 NRL season to come. I'm wondering if the Director can advise if that is also a response to the general business item that I raised from late last year.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Doran, the plan is to do those together, but I can confirm that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Yep. So, councillors, the start items are 5.1, 6.1, 6.5. Do I have a mover for the start items? Move Councillor Gates, seconded Councillor O'Neill. All those in favour? The start items are carried. It takes us to item 6.2. We welcome city officers. Good morning, Rebecca. Good morning, Luke.
Crunch in their mouth. Oh.
Good morning, councillors. Through the chair. Today we are going to talk about the operational enforcement of parking across on or across a driveway. This is a response to a petition that was received through Councillor Doran. So the purpose of the report is to provide the enforcement advice to Council regarding parking on or across a driveway. We're going to cover across the statutory rules, the obligations to Council, and the approach that we would like to take. As we said, this is a response to a petition that was received from Greenwich Court in Robina. So the statutory rules in relation to this come from the Transport Road User Management, or the TORM, which clearly states that a person may not park on or across a driveway, particularly what is classed as the VXO, which is the point between the council property and the private property. In terms of statistics for 2024, 10% of complaints have been received from the general public about parking across driveways, 1% of our infringements have been issued, and 3.5% of our warnings. So the obligations that we have come from the head of the power, which is a state legislation. The Queensland road rules clearly state that it is not permissible to park in a driveway, and Council takes a view of enforcing this. We would like to take an approach much in the same that was given to the verge parking, which was passed by Council late last year. So the enforcement approach would be the same in terms of we would like to take an education first approach. So in November 2024, Council endorsed the educational approach for parking on the verge, and this would be an extension of that method. So for the high risk areas, and that is an area where it is a 60 kilometre an hour and it's basically a vehicle is a danger, it would be an issue of immediate PIN. In low risk areas, we would issue a warning first and try to provide education to the community at first instance. And that would be more than 1.2 metres access, or it is not across a fully formed footpath. The approach that we've got is consistent with the TORM and would allow Council to provide education while still being compliant with state legislation. Any questions?
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I got the impression from the petition that the problem here in this particular street was that the vehicles couldn't park physically within the bounds of the property, and that parking in their own driveway, they extended out beyond the fence line, whereas the images showed completely different scenarios, and I just wanted to recognise that difference.
So maybe we could clarify that to Councillor Doran, since the petition came from his area. Was that your understanding of the catalyst of the petition?
Yes, parking in the demised driveway from the front of the garage to the back of the car left some residents getting infringed because part of the car was blocking what would be considered the verge. There was no demised footpath. There is no demised footpath there. And I think that's, to just diverge a little bit from Councillor Young's comment, that's different to the pictures up on the screen. So where there's no paved footpath, the impression of the community was that they were on their driveway in front of their garage, and their impression was that should be allowed.
So they were just extending out from their own physical boundary a little bit rather than being completely across.
Yeah. Right. So maybe before we get too much into that, could we seek, if that was the catalyst of the petition, could we seek clarity from officers that under this proposed approach, that in that kind of circumstance, we most likely wouldn't be issuing infringements if it was that kind of scenario, which is a very specific scenario?
So through the Chair, so the state legislation requires us to issue an infringement. With the education approaches, we've got a 1.2 metre distance between the road and a person passing. There would be an education approach in that instance.
Yeah, I understand, but it doesn't mean we have to issue a financial infringement. We can issue an educational infringement.
Yes, so we're still in compliance with the regulations if we are taking an action.
Councillor Gates first, and then Councillor Patterson, and then Councillor O'Neill.
Pretty mean, really.
Thank you, Chairman. Don't we require in our development approvals, through you to the director, a 5.5 metre distance between the property itself and the verge?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Gaze, I'm not sure it's consistent. I'd have to maybe get clarification from Mick or Luke or that, but it would depend on what the proposal was at that time and what officers assessed.
Right.
So my recollection of the land development guidelines is that figure has gone in and out a few times.
Might just get Roger to come and clarify that.
Tied up now.
Morning, councillors. Through you, Mr Chair. The city plan requires a AO setback of 6 metres. In a lot of development approvals or referral agency approvals, we do cut it down to 5.5 for the setback from the carport or the garage to the front boundary. We do have a scenario where we allow carports right on the zero lot front boundary. What we don't allow is sort of this no man's land of, say, 2.5 or 3 metres. So what that means is we approve a carport or a garage where you can park the car solely within your site, or you can't. So there's no in between. This particular scenario here, I don't know the circumstances. It might be in a historic approval, it might be an old carport or garage, but usually I can tell you now, we don't compromise, we don't have this no man's land for the very reason of trying to ensure that we don't get cars half parked across the nature strip.
Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. I'm just looking on Google Maps to get a sense of these driveways, and in the pictures you can see cars that are parked right up to that carport and are extending out the back. So my question is, in response, given this was a specific petition from people in Greenwich Court, did we measure the distances and identify which ones of those properties they are entitled to park at all, or if they are just not allowed to park?
Through you, Chair, Councillor. So we, from a compliance point of view, haven't specifically looked at that particular aspect, but what we are trying to do is to really look at a pragmatic compliance approach. So where there is sufficient room in those particular driveways that people aren't specifically penalised through a financial implication.
Councillor O'Neill and then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a query for Rebecca through you. I noticed the one in the high risk area. You've actually flagged the industrial areas, mixed industrial use. I've got a light industrial area in my division. We're having lots of trouble with it, quite a few streets in that area, with parking, of course. If there is that 1.5 metre area for pedestrians, would they be just given like a bit of a warning? I know that you've put in high risk, but there are areas that they have enough room. I mean, and we've actually, as a council, are approving lots of businesses, especially in light industrial mixed-use areas, for gyms, dance schools, car rentals, and then you throw all the automotive services and other, businesses like that, and you've got a huge problem, which we have at the moment. So I'm just wondering if there is enough pedestrian room where there'd be, that we could give them a warning first, or some education.
Through you, the Chair, we do take looking at each instance in specific. So without knowing the full circumstances, it's hard for me to give you a specific answer. The reason why we have the mixed use area is that the area is deemed to be unsafe. So the yardstick that we do use is through a safety first approach.
Just to follow up, the safety issue in a lot of these streets is the street is too narrow for both sides parking, and we don't want to take away too much parking because there's staff that need to be accommodated and certainly customers. So we're in a bit of a quandary, I think, in this. I guess other councils have got the same situation, but I'm looking at trying to actually create a verge parking, like taking away, like widening the street. That's about the only thing we can do, and still have a decent footpath.
We'll take those as a statement instead of a question. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. In previous discussions around this, and I know we've had a lot of discussions around parking in our local law too since my time coming into office. Previously in those discussions, though, it was my understanding that there was actually a level of flexibility that could be applied that I thought was contained within the Torum to allow a particular, whether it's a percentage of hangover from a person's property out towards the verge. Please correct me, I don't know if that's necessarily correct. That was my understanding, and it could only be in instances where there may be a larger verge access than the 1.2 metre access for pedestrians. But can I just get some clarity around that, perhaps? Because my understanding was there was some, and I don't know if it was the Torum or whether it was a city approach that allowed for that, I guess, not discretion of sorts, but just a understanding of the circumstances given to a particular driveway.
Through you, Chair. In relation to the Torum, there is no, it is very clear, it's black and white. You are not allowed to park across the VXO. The approach that the city is proposing to take is the same as with the verge, where we do an education first approach. We are taking an action, and that within that, what we are doing is setting out guidelines for our officers when they go out, so that we've got consistent parking throughout the city.
Through you, Chair, just Councillor, if I can just elaborate on that as well. In terms of that discretion component, I think through the discussions we've previously had on parking on the verge, we've really identified that there isn't discretion in terms of application of the Torum. What we can do, and where this approach is really trying to go, is discretion around the action that we are taking as a city to gain that compliance. So that's where we're able to take that education versus a financial compliance aspect.
Councillor Doran, question.
Thank you, Chair. Rebecca, thank you for your consultation on the way through. The particular issue that's raised by this petition, Chair, is actually one that gets raised with me through Division 11 quite a lot. There's a lot of narrow streets, and we can't unscramble an egg in relation to the development, but a lot of community resentment towards this particular fine, Chair, because they feel like they're doing the right thing. And so, Rebecca, my question to you is, if there is a gap left of the 1.2 metres, but there is overhang from the car from the driveway to the verge section, is it possible to have more leniency other than just the one warning, or is that the best the city can do and still fulfil its obligations under the Torum?
Through you, the Chair, the education first approach that we're taking is there are many actions that we can take in the education, so it's not definitively just one warning. So we can take one of many things in that education area. So we may do a mail out, we may do a flyer for that particular car. It depends on the particular situation and what we're seeing at the point in time. Our goal here is to gain compliance, voluntary compliance from the community. So within what we are proposing, we have a breadth of things available to city parking. We will record each one of those actions so that we can clearly show what we've done in that space. And then we may end up in a financial penalty pin, but that may, depending on the situation, it would depend on what's been taken in that space.
Chair, a follow-up question is, so we respect your application of the Torum, and I welcome the additional measure of the education approach before the enforcement. Has there been an assessment around the safety implications towards blocking the pedestrian path? Because that's the logic between the need to have the Torum have the infringement is because we don't want pedestrians on the road, right? So, but by putting the cars on the road on narrow streets, we do create a further risk to cars and pedestrians by having to weave in and out of cars on narrow streets. The city tells me that that they quite welcome the slowing down to create a safer movement. But is that part of the assessment here, or what is the safer outcome? Walking on a road to try and get away from a car that's out on the verge, or having cars weaving out through a narrow street with cars parked on both sides.
Could we see clarity first? Would that even be our assessment to do? This is state law. Wouldn't it be for the state to do that work?
Sure, but we're applying the TORM here with an education approach, and I'm curious because it's quite often brought to me that these residents are trying to do the better, what in their mind is the best thing, Chair, in getting off the road and creating an unobstructed roadway.
I understand your question, but and officers can respond. So have we done any kind of risk assessment or safety assessment between the two?
Through the Chair, we've not done a safety assessment between the two. Within city parking, the ream that we have is the head of power of the law. So we do need to apply the law as it's conspired. And the city has told us that they do not wish us to ignore the law as it stands. So we are trying to take an education first approach here. While I understand that the need to weave in and out, it depends on the circumstances and if that person is forced onto the road, whether there's a fully formed footpath or not.
Councillor Gates and then Councillor Patterson.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm sorry we're taking so long with this, but I had to respond just yesterday to a similar complaint from a resident in my division. And in the response, I highlighted that the state member, Mark Boothman, had raised the matter of the difference at Logan for streets under 6 metres as it referred to 2 wheels up, 2 wheels down. I'm just wondering, since there's a new government, whether as part of the recommendation today we could actually write to the state, because it's their regulation that is stopping us doing both 2 wheels up, 2 wheels down and this overhang situation. Perhaps we could add a dot point that we write and raise those issues with the new minister for transport to see if perhaps they will reconsider, rather than having the state tell us it's our problem when we're just complying with the state regulation.
So I'm happy. We'll check if there's any other questions, and if we come to a motion, if you want to make an amendment, Councillor Gates. Councillor Patterson, do you have a question?
Yeah, and first I would like to just note, I share Councillor Young's concern. When I look at the images up there, it would be easy to comply with that. When I look at what Greenwich Court actually has to deal with, it is a completely different situation, and if we use the images of what we're actually talking about, that would be useful. My question is, when I look at this, it's evident to me that even if every single car was off there, you could not drive a pram on that footpath because of bushes, trees, and even bins. There is no capacity to do that. So and clearly this is a historical matter, it's a planning matter where we've had these things. How do this law doesn't seem to fit this kind of a design of a street. So what do we do when we've got streets like this that just don't actually fit? There is no way I could push a pram up there with those palm trees in the way, where you've got probably 40 centimetres between the palm tree and that side, and then 60 centimetres from that side. There's just...
Councillor,
I don't understand.
A direct question you want to get to here?
So the question is, how do we apply laws where the streets don't actually make sense? No one can push a pram up that footpath.
Through the chair, Councillor, I think the way that we implement that is probably exactly what we're recommending with this particular item. So we are talking about taking a pragmatic approach where education around legal parking practices that are the most safe, context to that particular situation, is where we're going to go 9 times out of 10 within that particular location.
Follow-up question. So in these small ones, which is a court, it's a cul-de-sac, my guess is there's probably kids who, people would be walking up there. Is there potential for a law that distinguishes the difference between a closed cul-de-sac and not? Because, there is no one who's walking up that footpath.
Through the Chair, Councillor, it's our understanding, the City's position, that we're not able to create a local law to undermine the Torum. So unfortunately, in this particular instance, I don't believe it is.
Any other questions before I seek a mover? Yeah. Councillor Gates, did you wish to move it with an amendment? Microphone, Councillor.
Sorry. The amendment would be that the Mayor writes to Minister Brent Mickelberg seeking review of the Torum as it relates to driveway parking setback breaches. Does that explain it well enough?
What's his role?
They've got local member grant. Department of Transport.
Minister for Transport.
It's the Minister for Transport. I don't know what his exact title is, but
Queensland Minister for Transport. Transport and other things. And it's Brand.
oh, it's Brent, isn't it? Brent, B-R-E-N-T. Sorry, Brent.
Transport and main roads.
Yeah, Minister for Transport and Main Roads, sorry. As it relates... The Mayor writes to the Mayor seeking review. Driveway parking setback breaches, I said, and 2 wheels up, 2 wheels down in streets under 6 metres wide. And Chairman, by doing this, we will have covered every base, and if the government chooses to make amendment to that, we can help our residents, and if not, we can put it to bed.
Right, so we'll just wait for those words to be completely up and make sure that Councillor Gates is happy with them.
Wide, 6 metres wide. M-E-T-R-E-S. Thank you. Wide. Sorry, just add wide at the end. Thank you.
Councillor Doran, are you happy to second that motion? Very good. So Councillor Doran is seconder. Any questions of the addition from any other councillors? Anyone wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Gates, are you happy to take what you've said so far on the matter?
I think
close it off.
I think it's clear, Chairman. I'll just say that this is an issue that presents in all of the newer areas in our city, and whilst I respect the work that our officers have done, this is just the final step, since it's not our legislation, to be sure that we've done everything we possibly can to address the issue, because it's of concern to a lot of people.
Councillor Doran, this petition was a catalyst from your area. Did you have anything you wish to contribute?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I welcome the work that the city did on this petition, and I thank them for where they arrived at. Having an educational approach ahead of infringement where it's appropriate, not in a high-risk situation, is going to be welcomed by those who unknowingly break this particular state law in the Torum. And I think that that will be hopefully the educational approach that removes them from doing that again. Chair, I think one of the things that this particular petition brought home to me quite early on in my tenure was just how many narrow streets in my division are affected by this particular issue. We have a lot of cars on the streets, which causes often one-way traffic and cars having to stop and wait for the next car to come. And so often those that are in their mind doing the right thing by getting their car off the road, putting it in their driveway, or at times, whilst I don't support 2 wheels on, 2 wheels off, but at times trying to create more room on the road, often inadvertently get themselves an infringement notice. And I think that the city's got to continue to do a bit of work on this. I acknowledge that it's not entirely our responsibility. In fact, we're in the hierarchy of laws. We can't do much more than we are, and I do welcome this new addition of an education approach. It does affect my area. It is those that park inadvertently that I worry about, and I hope that the issuing of this educational approach first will start to correct some behaviour and get the result we're looking for without the financial penalty to people who, for the most part, Chair, are trying in their mind to do the right thing in freeing up our roads.
Councillor Gates, did you need to close it all? In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. Luke, Rebecca, thank you very much. That's item 6.2 dealt with. We'll move on to item 6.3. We welcome Trina and Jordana. Good morning, ladies. So there is a very short presentation with this item, and then we can go into questions if there is any.
Good morning, councillors. I'm here today, if I can work out what I'm doing. Here we go. I'm here today to provide you an update on the actions that we've been undertaking for the new planning scheme since we last spoke to you in November. So for the new planning scheme, we have been busy working through undertaking a full review on the activities that we need to be able to progress the policy development. So this has included the gaps analysis of the state interest review for the state, as well as the shaping SEQ. We've also completed the phase 1 of the scheme architecture review. We've also undertaken a review of the provisions from the previous amendments, as well as the city registers and the branches works program. We've also been undertaking workshops with our development assessment team to understand the pain points and the opportunities. And we've also been undertaking coordination and working with our 20 policy areas across the organisation to help assist with their policy development. All of the policy development that we've been working through, we have been putting through a prioritisation matrix, which will help us form up the scoping for the new planning scheme. We're now embarking on technical briefs, which will help us inform the policy position statements that we'll be utilising to inform the new planning scheme. We have also been working through with the LGMS and Urban Change Readiness Program, and so for the new planning scheme, we'll be considering those findings to assist us with the policy development for the new scheme as well. The technical briefs will be utilised to bring back some policy position papers to Council, and they will start coming to Council within the next few months. Other than that, there have been some workshops with Council for LGMS and Urban Change Readiness, and that will continue over the next couple of months. Do you have any questions for me?
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update, and I've welcomed being part of the working group that's been meeting on this matter with the industry. My question relates to, at what point in the cycle of the new planning scheme, from here to finish, will there be consultation with the state government around infrastructure that sits outside of the council's obligations, so that we can align that with our expectations in the new planning scheme?
Yeah, through the chair, we'll be forming a state reference group with the state government. So we are in the process of working out how that's going to occur now. So that will include all aspects of the planning scheme, including infrastructure. So we'll be working with the state, and that will include advocacy as well as what we need to be able to get a planning scheme that's actually going to work for the city.
Jordana, if you wouldn't mind as well, so just Councillor Doran, I think one thing we're looking to lean into on this as well is that some of the modelling work we're doing won't just consider our network. We'll be looking to get data and input from some of those state departments like Main Roads, so that we can run modelling that looks at the entire network, because state and local roads run into each other and run through each other. Us just doing it for our network isn't enough. So doing some work with them at the same time, modelling on that. And just for your information, it's on a key advocacy document already for the first meetings with new ministers that it's all well and good to force local governments to create an LGIP. The state government need to be a lot more upfront with where their modelling fits in with ours, and where the timing of their upgrades fit in with ours as well. Councillor Young, did I see a hand go up then?
Areas, have they all been sent? That was meant to be for Gaven North and Highland Park. I saw drafts, I think, in October. You can take it on notice if you want.
Yes, we'll take that one on notice. I know some letters have been drafted, but I can't confirm today whether they've gone out, so I'll let you know.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Martin, was it?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on, obviously, the urban change readiness survey and the sort of direction discussion points, just seeking a bit of confirmation around when we're looking to go back out to the community, or when that would be publicly viewable on some of those outcomes for the community.
Through the Chair, we're looking to come back to the 25th of March committee with our full report on the outcomes of that engagement.
Councillors, any other questions on this item? In that case, seek a mover for the item. Councillor Young, a seconder. Councillor Martin. Councillor Young, do you need to speak to it at all? No. Cool.
I mean, it's obviously a very important body of work. It's in good hands, and there's no...
That's a yes.
Yes.
That's cool. And I'll just check. No one looking to speak against the item, I'm guessing. Councillor Young, do you need to close? No. In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour, against, carried, unanimous. Officers, thank you. Lauren, apologies, I didn't see you there at the start, but good morning to you as well. Thank you, ladies. That's 6.3 dealt with, which takes us to item 6.4. Nathan, Phil, good morning to you both, gentlemen.
Good morning, councillors. Item 6.4 is an application for a final development approval for integrated housing and accommodation premises consisting of 14 townhouses, 161 units under the Robina Central Planning Agreement at 13 Robina Town Centre Drive in Robina. The subject site consists of two allotments. The northern lot, which is lot 898, is a development site with an area of 17,350 square metres, and the southern lot, shown as lot 25, is for future public open space. This figure just shows the context of the site, being north of the Robina Town Centre and east of the Robina train station, hospital and state school. The subject site is located on the Robina Central Planning Agreement area, which is governed by the Local Government Robina Central Planning Agreement Act of 1992. Development of land within this area is not assessed against Council's City Plan or the Planning Act, but rather against the provisions of the RCPA. The RCPA includes an overall master plan, which is divided into several precincts, which is shown on the left. Each precinct has one or more development sections that are administered by specific plans of development that are consistent with the master plan and the precinct intents, which is set out within the RCPA. The plan of development is effectively the planning scheme for the area it relates to and specifies the intended land uses, density and building heights for that development section. The subject site is within the East Lake B development section. This applicable plan of development was approved by Council on the 27th of April 2023, and officers note that a copy of this plan of development is attached within the agenda report. This figure shows the development concept plan within the approved plan of development, which illustrates the intended development pattern for the site, noting that a varied building height is anticipated, ranging between 6, 8 and 12 stories, with an internal roadway connection intersecting with Robina Town Centre Drive, The intersection with Robina Town Centre Drive was approved through that plan of development. The applicant has proposed this application as stage 1 of the development within the site, with future stages 2 and 3 to be lodged as future applications. The figure below shows the site plan of stage 1, which consists of an internal roadway and townhouses located along the northern portion of the site and 2 tower forms located on the southern portion. The applicant has proposed a building height that is in accordance with the plan of development as demonstrated within these figures, which shows 2-storey building height to the north, 8 storeys where it is adjacent to Robina Town Centre Drive, and 12 storeys within the southern portion of the site. The development proposes 14 times 3-bedroom townhouses along the northern boundary. Each townhouse is provided with 2 parking spaces. Officers note that while these appear as 3 storeys internally, they are technically 2 storeys due to the natural ground level and appear as 2 storeys when viewed from the north, which is demonstrated through the figure shown on the right, with the northern boundary on the left-hand side of that figure. The development proposes 161 units within 2 tower forms consisting of 8 and 12 storeys. These figures show the proposed tower forms when viewed from the future open space lot and from Robina Town Centre Drive frontage, with the townhouses shown on the right-hand side. 3 levels of basement are proposed for the tower forms, consisting of 205 resident spaces, 21 visitor spaces. Officers note that within the approved plan of development, the applicable car parking rates are taken from the current version of the city plan, and that the development achieves compliance with these parking rates. Communal open space for the units is provided on the ground floor in the form of a pool and recreational areas. The tower levels contain a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units, with each unit containing its own balcony. The development proposed to achieve compliance with the plan of development for density, building height, site cover, plot ratio and car parking, noting that there are future stages proposed that will be proposed on the subject site. It is, however, noted that the development does not comply with the POD for the front and side setbacks. While this does not comply with the plan of development, clause 5.7 of the plan of development allows for council to approve the development despite the non-compliance, having regard to the amenity of the surrounding area and the nature of the proposed use. I'll just go through each of those setback non-compliances. So to the Robina Town Centre Drive frontage, the POD prescribes...
Excuse me, sorry, would you mind just going back and repeating that? I just missed it.
Sorry, was that just the last part of that? The plan of development affords a clause that allows council to approve a development despite any non-compliance with the plan of development, which it has a list of items that council needs to respond to. Relevant to the setbacks are the amenity of the surrounding area and the nature of the proposed use. To the Robina Town Centre Drive frontage, the POD prescribes an 8-metre setback. While the majority of the built form achieves this, there are a number of minor encroachments which are generally limited to the services required to be on or in close proximity to the frontage, such as a water meter, booster cabinet and substation, and a small portion of the building form which includes a mail room. In this regard, officers are satisfied that the proposal still provides a positive interface with the streetscape, despite the encroachments, and that the nature of the encroachments are typical for residential developments, and that this still allows for a good amenity outcome for landscaping to the frontage.
So, Nathan, we might just pause there a second, clarify. So the non-compliance with setbacks against the original POD is limited to what's on the screen now in those 4 sections.
Relevant to the frontage, that's right. There are setback non-compliance for the north and side, north and south side boundaries. To the north, the townhouses include outdoor patios on the ground floor that encroach on the prescribed 4-metre side setback. Despite this encroachments, the patios maintain a 1.5 metre setback to the northern boundary, which still allows for a sufficient landscape buffer to the adjoining residents, and their lightweight nature of the patio will not result in an imposition of the visual amenity on the adjoining residents. To the south, the lower levels of the tower include a podium planter, which encroach on the prescribed 3-metre setback to the adjoining future public open space lot. Despite the encroachment, the plan has provided improved amenity outcome for the future residents and for the future users of the public open space. Overall, officers have determined that the proposal complied with the provisions of the plan of development, with the exception of setbacks, which is considered appropriate given the nature of the proposed use and the impact on the amenity of the surrounding area. And in that regard, officers recommend approval. Are there any questions?
Questions? Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Young.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. On page 60, I'll just go back to it. Page 60 and 61. Given the conversation we've just had about parking, could you please just clarify for me, with those images that we've got there, if someone was to park in front of their garage, do they have sufficient room to do that and not impact on the footpath?
Through the chair to the councillor. Each townhouse is provided with 2 parking spaces. A number of those are tandems with cars parked in front of the garage. For those units, there is sufficient room for that tandem car park to be in front of the garage. For the remainder of the units, they are generally sufficiently set back from the roadway. It is noted, however, that's an internal roadway and won't be a council road. So I don't think they'd be subject to the same infringement notices that had just been discussed.
No, that would come under the body corporate to police.
Thank you. If I can, just to follow up on that. So just for example, this TH05 on page 60, is that 60? Yeah. Just so that I understand. So you've got a garage there. If they were to park in front of that garage, you're saying that that is sufficient space for them to park in front of that garage and still have access to the footpath. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. Just from looking at the drawings here, we hadn't gone through and specifically assessed that, given there was a lot of clearance from that to the internal roadway, but just from looking at the drawings, there is sufficient room.
And may I do a follow-up question? On page 81, when you refer to version 9, that's been considered for car parking. So I take it that that's more advantageous for the applicant to use version 9. Can you just explain how that would compare if they used a later version of the city plan?
Yeah, through the chair, I haven't done the calcs for the current version of the city plan to see what would be different. I think from memory there's only visitor car parking, which might have changed. Sorry, there was no difference between version 9 and the current version.
Councillor Young next and then Councillor Fowler.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask through you a couple of questions about that lake, which is on lot 25, and the sustainability of that. So are there any pollution devices planned in these stages of the development to protect the water quality from gross pollutants? And
through the chair to the councillor, the applicant provided us a stormwater management plan which measured stormwater quality and quantity. So for quality, they had treatment devices to ensure that the quality of stormwater leaving the site would be of our sufficient standard, which is similar to every other development we do around the city. And then that waterway in particular will be a future open space lot where it's currently owned by the same developer. So prior to that being transferred, which will be done on as part of a future application, they are required to go in and make sure that that's up to a sufficient standard before it comes to council.
Oh, so I mistook the report. I thought that was already owned by council. Sorry?
It's not at this stage, but it will be contributed to council upon completion of future stages.
Okay, so there'll be remedial works done on it?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yeah, the photograph on page 69 shows it's, or 66 is 65 in fact, shows it's not in great condition at this point in time. Could be improved substantially, I would imagine. That's proposed.
So I'm guessing there's conditions that officers could point to address Councillor Young's concerns?
We had included specific conditions as part of this application, given this application isn't triggering the upgrade of that waterway or the transfer of that waterway to council.
Understood.
There was specific wording put in the POD that makes sure that council needs to be satisfied that it's of a sufficient standard before it gets transferred to council, because at the time of the POD we all kind of agreed that that standard of that waterway wasn't fantastic, and so before we took it on board we wanted to see that it was improved
Councillor Young, would you be happy that between now and full council officers prepared a memo of what was approved in the POD in regards to that pond and what will be triggered as part of future applications?
That'd be great.
Get some confidence around it.
Yep. Thanks, Chairman. Thank you.
I had Councillor Fowler next and Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chair. I just had some questions on the setback of the rear of the townhouses. So when we're looking at the patio, what's the distance from the I see we have a little hedge or some landscaping. That patio looks to me it goes almost up to that. What distance are we looking at from that to the road?
Through the chair, it's minimum 1.5 metres. There are some of those patios which are set back about 1.7 metres, but the closest it goes to that side boundary is 1.5 metres, and that's only on the ground floor as well.
Follow up?
Just a separate question, if I may, Chair.
Would you mind if I ask to follow up on that,
Yeah,
that
sure.
specific item first? When you say patio, are we talking a covered deck or is it just an outside deck area?
To the chair, it's just an outside deck area,
Right, so
outside at grade area.
Okay, so there's no roof structure on it. It's just a deck, an outside deck.
Well, there's a roof patio over the top of the ground floor outdoor private space.
Your next question, Councillor.
I guess for those of us who aren't the Division 11 councillor, is there a way that you could succinct the nuances with the Robina planning of development and the scheme there for those of us who may not be across it in detail? Yep. And I guess what parts of that differ from our city plan that we should be considering with the application?
No, but possibly Roger, could you give us the high-level overview of the difference between the Robina Central Planning Act and how it's different to planning scheme and how things are assessed under that act?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll have a go. So the Robina Act, or the Robina Central Planning Agreement under the Local Government Act, was done in 1992, and the purpose was to obviously facilitate a master plan development. So since 1992, it's always been separate to the Planning Act of the day. So it used to be the Integrated Planning Act, Sustainable Planning Act, and now the Planning Act, and then the planning schemes that the cities had under those acts. So it's always been a separate and completely different assessment with its own rules. So none of the city plan codes apply to assessment in this area. And the way, I guess, it works in a summary format is there's land in there which is not developed. Applicants will come into the council to get a plan of development approved, which is what this developer did in 2023. So that sets there's kind of a master plan with concepts, and then the plan of development narrows or puts some more detail around particular blocks of land, and then once those plans of development are approved, they set the assessment criteria for what's called a final development approval, which is what this application is here. So it's hard to compare, but they're completely different processes.
But that's probably the big nuance, is the need for a POD on every site, which isn't dissimilar to if someone put a prelim under our planning scheme, could do a prelim and then seek further approvals afterwards. But it's the one fairly big nuance is a POD on every site and then subsequent final applications needed. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. So if we're looking at, and I'm new to this, don't understand this planning scheme as much as I do in Century Cove and Hope Island, but if we're looking at it as a holistic plan and then each site has a POD, in what context do we need to consider other sites in this area when we're assessing each different POD?
Through the chair, we would have regard to other sites when you're assessing the POD. That's what we did in 2023. That was the council resolution then to approve that plan of development. So that's when you have a look at impacts on surrounding sites, and we did that, and that's why this POD's got some controls there to say, the heights are locked in at this. For that northern boundary, we had a 4 metre setback, but that was based on heights of 6 or 8 stories. So the POD is when you have regard to surrounding lands, and then once that's locked in, where really these final development approvals are just being, it's almost a check against the POD. So
happy with that. Councillor Gates, you're next.
Sorry to be confused. I've been here a long time, not like Councillor Fowler, and I'm very confused about because we've supported the POD, does that mean this is really, we just have to keep going? And if we approve the recommendation before us today, is that approving all the next stages, or have they already been approved as part of the POD and we're just comparing the application as it comes with the requirements?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're not approving the next stages yet. So for those to happen, the applicant would need to lodge another final development approval, an FDA like this one, and then the city would be able to assess that again, but assess it only against the provisions in the POD. Okay. So the POD was the critical approval that the council gave for this land.
Okay, thank you. That explains it.
No other questions? Other questions, Councillor Martin?
Thanks, Chair. Just had a question. On page 79, it shows, I guess, the short throw, traffic lane into the site, but it transects, I guess, an on-road bicycle lane. And I guess I just had some concerns around safety, given it's. Could you explain why it's a short turn off, and do we have some safety issues there potentially with on-road cycling?
Through the chair to the councillor, that figure on there, and I just wanted to note that was part of the POD approval as well, and that was given to us by the applicant at the time based on a traffic impact assessment. For the technical matters, I might ask Melinda to come up to answer those from transport assessment.
Through the chair, sorry, was the question in relation to the interaction between the left turn lane and the bike lane, or in relation to the design of a left turn lane in terms of the length?
Well, it's probably both. It's noting that it's a short turning lane. Is this the best sort of outcome? But also, given there is a bike lane, would that further exacerbate potentially a safety issue, or was there other options looked at, perhaps?
Sure. Through the chair, I'll treat those two items separately. So in terms of having a shared through lane with a bike lane, that is a standard arrangement that you'll see throughout the city, and that arrangement is something that the asset custodian supported as part of the POD. In terms of the actual design of the left turn lane being a short turn lane, that again is a standard option under the Ausroads design guidelines. So when you look at the need for a turn lane, you're looking at left turning volumes versus through traffic to determine whether there's a need for left turners to have a separate lane to turn into the development. And that chart will tell you how long that lane needs to be, and that's based on a number of factors. But in particular situations, you can reduce the length of that turn lane from a standard left turn to a short left turn. And that would be to do with things like the environment, so the speed of the road, so it's a lower speed being 50 kilometres per hour, the demand for left turners at that location. So it also gives consideration, I guess, to the road environment and any other intersections that might be in proximity to that location. But again, that version of a left turn lane is a standard turn lane design under Ausroads standards.
Thanks, Chair. And just to follow on from that, so that short throw, would that have been calculated for the ultimate future stages capacity, not just this?
Through the chair,
stage?
That's correct. Yeah, so that intersection design you see there was endorsed under the POD for the reason that it is to accommodate the ultimate development traffic. So we know that under the POD there's a cap on maximum development yield of 414 dwellings and 2,500 square metres of commercial GFA. So that intersection design is sufficient to cater for the ultimate development traffic, not just for the application that we see today.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I just need to clarify that I'm not conflicted in any way in this discussion. There is no mention of Robina projects here, simply QIC Robina Proprietary Limited. But I was just worrying that because of the historical situation, whether I'm in any way...
20 years ago, Diane. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Martin, were you happy on that for now? And can I just check, is there any other questions for Melinda at this stage? Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. Nathan, thank you. Oh, sorry, not for no traffic-related question, transport questions. Sorry.
Councillor Doran, before we launch into your question, Roger, would you like the opportunity just to talk about the stormwater quality side of things quickly?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the question relating to the quality of the water body before it gets transferred over to the city. Within the POD, there is clause 6.2, and I'll just read it out, it's not too long. Upon the completion of the development of East Lake B development section, and once the council is satisfied the waterway is of a sufficient standard and quality suitable provision for access for maintenance, the waterway can be transferred to the city, but not before. So that's actually a requirement of the POD. It doesn't ever fall away, it's a requirement. This is only stage 1, so in stage 2 we'll reiterate that requirement of the POD. But before they can transfer the water body to the city, we have control that it has to be of a sufficient standard and quality before we take ownership and responsibility for it.
Which, Roger, would mean that in subsequent stages they'd have to put an OPW in to get approval of what that works would look like and what we'd expect of them in those works.
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct.
Yep. Councillor Young, do you need any more detail before for Councillor? Are you happy to take that as answered?
No, I'm very happy with that. Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger. Councillor Doran, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Nathan, thank you for your engagement on this one all the way through. I understand there's been a change to the pedestrian connection path that leads from the front of this subject site to the water body, Lot 25, that Councillor Young was referring to, since the initial engagement, but there's no inclusion or hasn't been any commentary about that today, and I haven't seen any images or what that looks like. And my understanding was that the applicant, whilst hesitant at first, has decided to comply with the DDA requirements. Can you speak to that, please?
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. And apologies, I can't get am I able to get the PowerPoint back up? I don't have a figure for it in the report, but I do have one which I can show you. You're right, the applicant initially didn't want to provide a ramp connection essentially from the Robina Town Centre Drive frontage down to the future open space lot. There is quite a significant grade difference, and that they'd originally proposed a stair connection down. So as a result of further consultation with the applicant, they had eventually provided us with a plan. Oh, sorry, that was it there. So as part of that, we've included a specific condition that requires them to construct that outcome in order to get that DDA compliant access from the Robina Town Centre Drive frontage to the existing footpath. Given the grade, it does end up being quite a zigzaggy ramp.
First time I've seen that, so I must say don't know whether what is the green? Just out of curiosity on the map there, is that landscaping or is that the difference in what is the green? Is that landscaping around a boardwalk or what is that?
Through the chair, they hadn't specifically demonstrated what landscape treatment is going to be, but it would be grass landscaping, depending on the batter size and like the batters that are required.
Chair, follow up on this one. Has that been consulted through the team working on the Robina walkability study and the project around Robina walkability?
Through the chair, we hadn't specifically consulted that team, but we were just more trying to get the access as part of this application.
Chair, do you think that it's reasonable for that to pass through the team of the Robina walkability to test it against their requirements through that study before we get to full council?
I don't think that would be too difficult to get done before full council. We're happy to take that as an action. Yep. Noting that their interest should rightly be, is it DDA compliant? It's probably going to be their main concern, which this is what you have to do to make it DDA compliant.
Another question. So, Nathan, the only area that I can sort of see in the report, which probably speaks to the question I'm going to ask, is page 121. And I'm wondering, on page 121, it's got a fairly sizable area that takes a bit of a radius. And I'm wondering if you could point to where, in relation to the subject site, there's off-street parking available to the 1,000 potential residents and visitors that might overflow? Say, for example, if the parking supply is not quite adequate, where do the balance of the cars park? If you could point to it on the map.
Through the chair to the councillor, there wasn't any off-street parking available on the frontage of the subject site. On-street car parking available along the frontage of the subject site. Given they have complied with the requirements of the city plan parking rates, we didn't consider it appropriate to assess off.
No, I get that. I get it's not an assessment tool. It's a question as to, is there, okay, I'll rephrase the question, and it's my last question, Chair. Is there any off-street parking on Collier Keys Drive, Robina Town Centre Drive, in that area?
Through the chair, not within the frontage of the site.
Yeah. Chair, I've got a move a motion for a refusal, if you'll take it, please.
Can I ask first, there was a slide that had the car parking ratios, I think how many car parks or how many visitor car parks there were. Can we have... Right, so that's the under the POD, the amount of approved resident car parks, the amount of approved visitor car parks. Yep. Councillor Doran, I will come back to you for your motion. I'll just run through questions first. So, Councillor Gates.
Well, my question actually relates to Councillor Doran wanting to move a refusal. And through you, Chairman, can I ask the officers, there's a part in the report that suggests that Council can only refuse it if it conflicts with the planning intent of Part 2 of the RCPA or doesn't comply with the conditions of the plan of development. So I don't know what those conditions are or whether it does or doesn't comply, and I would need to know that before I decide whether to support Councillor Doran or not.
So there might be the right opportunity then for Councillor Doran to put forward his motion, and then we can seek that advice from officers. So, Councillor Doran, do you have a motion with this chamber staff?
I do.
It's in the start, that piece. On page 49.
So, officers, we have Councillor Doran's proposed motion up now. Councillors, could I suggest that we might take a 10-minute adjournment, give officers the chance to prepare some thoughts and advice, and then we'll come back and get their advice. Everyone happy with that? It's a 10-minute adjournment. Councillors, we'll recommence the meeting at 10:20. Councillor Doran has moved a change recommendation in regards to item 6.4. We've just taken a short adjournment to allow officers to consider the proposed motion in regards to the RCPA Act. I might hand it over to Nathan and Roger to just provide some advice.
Thanks, Chair. In response to the item 1, which was setbacks, I did briefly touch on it in my presentation, which was Clause 5.7 of the Plan of Development does afford Council the ability to relax the provisions of the Plan of Development if it's considered justified. Having regard to a number of items there, officers' assessment determined that the setback encroachments were justified given the nature of the encroachments and the lack of impact to the adjoining amenity or the streetscape amenity for it. There is a detailed assessment starting on page 72 of the agenda.
Roger, do you wish to talk to the EP part of it?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Under the Robina Central Planning Agreement, there was an allocated equivalent population maximum threshold of 23,000 EP, equivalent population. And to date, we've done a lot of work on calculating just how much of that EP of the 23,000 has been used. To date,
but he's
the officer can finish.
To date, there has been 13,352.2 EP delivered. There are a number of approvals and commitments that have occurred but haven't been actually delivered yet, and that takes the EP to between 15,653 and 19,408 EP. In terms of all the commitments, all the approvals that we've done, the maximum, and this is at a conservative level, is 19,408 EP. So we consider that this proposal, which has already been factored in under the POD, that's already been allocated, that this development will not compromise or get close to reaching this 23,000 EP cap.
Councillor Doran for a question.
Well, Chair, the manager over there has introduced a position that was not in the report. No commentary in specific relating to any of the EPs.
Do you mean after you introduced a change recommendation that opened him up to answer it?
The calculation that the manager just put forward, my question is, that's conflicted with the actual master developer's calculation of the 23,000, and I'd contend that the city has a conflict of interest because by getting over the 23,000, we have to put more infrastructure in. So we do.
So, and I'll rule on you introduced the change recommendation which introduced this matter, so the officers have got no choice but to respond to it. So I'm happy, more than happy with that. In regards to the second point, the officers have got their calculation. If the master developer has a different calculation, I'm not aware of that. That's not in a report. You've introduced that now.
So a question then, with regards to the figures, can the officers outline how many EPs credits QIC, the proponent, has remaining at this time to be allocated to their lots?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll have to take that on notice. That's not something that I can do today because QIC is not the only owner of land within the Robina area.
Well, that speaks to the point, though, Chair. So they have said to me in a meeting with you in the meeting that they only have 1,000 credits remaining, and every single one of them is going to this block, leaving a significant site of significance to this council without any EPs available to develop. That's the point of my argument on point 2, which I would like to put as part of my motion.
So I think Roger's answered that he can't answer that today, but it possibly is something that before full council you can attempt to provide further advice on and can have a chat with Councillor Doran about what was said in what meetings and try and get some clarity around that for Councillor Doran and for all councillors. And we have to accept that as an action, EGM. Cool. Councillor Young, did you have a question in regards to that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So this owner is QIC Robina Proprietary Limited. Are they the only participant in the RCPA?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the QICs they have the majority of land, but they're not the only owners within the RCPA. There are other owners. They're not a party to this application, but there are other owners within the RCPA.
Sorry, what do you mean they're not a party to this application? They're the owner of the property.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understood the question was more relating to the entire RCPA area, which QIC don't own the whole of the RCPA, but they are the owner of this site.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, understand the manager's coming back to us on the 1,000 EPs for QIC and whether that's the figure or whether it's not. Being that they are the major landholder through the area, what else do they have to develop? Because if they're using the whole 1,000, if that is fact, for this development, like what else is left in the area that they plan to develop?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our calculations are our calculations. I've sourced the calculations from officers that are involved directly in the rollout of infrastructure and the actual forecasting. So that's the information that I've got. They believe it's only up to 19,408, well below the 23,000. That's what I've been told. There are other vacant areas within the RCPA that haven't actually been calculated as part of the 23,000 cap, and that's the Peninsula site, which is to the north of around David Jones of the Robina Town Centre. There's a large vacant area there. That land hasn't had a POD yet, so it actually hasn't been calculated for EPs. We believe currently on the table that I got in front of me, there is sufficient capacity to allocate EPs for that land if and when a POD comes in for that site.
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. So if we're crystal balling the situation, does it mean that we're envisaging that the EPs will be increased? And if so, and that's not part of the original RCPA, why would council be responsible for the provision of infrastructure rather than the applicant?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the whole concept of the Robina Central Planning Agreement was set up on, as Mick said earlier, creating a master plan. It was always envisaged that 23,000 equivalent population was the threshold, and once you go above that, basically that meant you're in conflict with the Robina Central Planning Agreement. So all infrastructure, all the old headworks, infrastructure charges, the whole lot has been calibrated on this 23,000 EP. It's my understanding that you can't go above that 23,000 cap. The Act just doesn't contemplate further development under it.
Well, I'm going to mention the elephant in the room, which is the Olympic Village. How many EP would that cater for? Because we can't not consider that has been proposed by the state government.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as I said earlier, the officers involved in forecasting part of the infrastructure team, they've calculated that it's maximum 19,400. So my calculations is there's 3,500 EP conservatively still to spare. That's on the information that we've been provided.
Sorry, I thought the 19,000 was for this proposal.
No, through you, Mr. Chair, this is about the whole development will be about 1,000 to 1,100 EP, the entire development, which has already been factored into that 19,500. We will provide a memo that clarifies what I've been speaking to today. Okay, we will do that. But in the meantime, my understanding is if there is going to be an Olympic Games village, that's in the order of maximum around the 1800 EP. That's the information I've been told.
Question, Councillor Doran.
The EP conversation so far has not aligned with the Master Developer Chair, who I think, and my question is coming, is in the game of life, you back self-interest. I don't know too many developers that leave money on the table, guys, and they say they've allocated all 23,000. So my question is, every single lot that is in that master plan, either currently owned, delivered, or sold to somebody to be delivered, has an allocation in their contract of EPs maximum. Are you aware of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we are correct.
You are aware. And so the developer has allocated to every undeveloped lot and developed lot a certain amount of credits to each lot so they don't breach the 23,000, because as you said before, Manager, that would be a breach of the RCPA, correct? Yep. So each lot chair has an allocation of EPs, and each owner of the lot therefore has an EP. This particular owner of this lot has 1,000 EPs, which the officers have stipulated, which were meant to be distributed across multiple sites, not just one. So my question to the officers is it fair to say that the proponent, QIC, has essentially grabbed all their EPs, the remaining, which was 1,000 admitted by them, and plonked them onto this lot, leaving future sites of significance without any EPs based on their ownership of EPs?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our calculations don't match the statement that you've just made.
Could I seek clarity? So Councillor Doran made the point that as part of the contract, wouldn't our calculations be based on PODs that have been lodged and assessed? So we have no knowledge of individual contracts or what may be in those. We only have knowledge of what PODs have actually been lodged, and our calculation would be an accumulation of those, wouldn't it? So shouldn't there logically be a gap that there are sites that haven't got a POD on them yet? While they have an allocation in a contract, we wouldn't have them in our forecast yet because we haven't got the POD on it yet.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. There is only one parcel of land that doesn't have a POD allocated to it. So, yes, every POD site within the RCPA has been allocated a EP cap.
Further to that then, is there a site identified for the Olympic facilities? And does it have an EP assigned to it? Do we know?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is a large parcel of land that's currently vacant that has been talked about as part of the Olympic Games that has not been subject yet to a plan of development. That
falls within the RCPA?
Falls within the RCPA, but it hasn't been allocated a POD. Therefore, there hasn't been a EP cap applied to it, or allocation EP applied to it.
So theoretically, if the government wanted to build a games village there, it might take them over the cap that exists in their own legislation.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, crystal ball gazing, hypothetically, depending on the size of a development, but in theory, if it was a very intensive development, it may well reach that cap.
So I was happy because it was introduced in the change recommendation that this rabbit hole was opened up, but I think we've gone down it far enough because we're just getting into hypotheticals now. The officers have committed to a memo to more detailed explain the RCPA and how the EPs work and their understanding of their calculation versus possibly what the master developer has put forward. Is there a question away from the EP argument? Because I think we've run that one to ground. Councillor Gates.
Sorry, Chairman. My question doesn't relate to the EPs, but well, it does, because if the state proceeds with the development of the parcel of land that has been identified and it goes over the cap, before full council since that would be illegal under the current rules, why can we do some work on who pays for the infrastructure? Because I'm damn sure I don't want to support this if it leads to a huge black hole for council in developing additional infrastructure which was not envisaged necessary under the existing RCPA.
So, officers, the likelihood of being able to get remotely close to providing that advice before full council, given that would require the state government to make a lot of commitments and information they haven't provided yet?
Through you, Mr. Chair, councillors might recall that our city planning branch has brought some reports through here about the Robina Act and what might happen once the agreement reaches its end life. So, in my opinion, it's not correct to assume once the agreement reaches its end that the council's responsible for all the infrastructure upgrade. It would have to be determined what replaces the Robina Act and the Robina Central Planning Agreement, and it's been spoken about there might be a PDA or it might come back to the city plan, and both of those regimes have their own infrastructure charging and infrastructure planning sort of processes. So the PDAs have a DCOP, which is like our LGIP, or if it was a city plan, it would go into LGIP, and charges would be charged accordingly and not the same way as they're done under the agreement.
Councillor Patterson.
Chair, I've got a general question about how we discuss things in planning committee. And I have a request that we don't use acronyms. We have at least one councillor who's dyslexic. We have community people who are listening to this who don't know when we say EP, we're talking about equivalent persons, don't know when we talk about PODs, we're talking about plans. If we can just use a word, so we can, like you can say EP population or EP something, just so that we can just, people who are listening to this, who haven't got a glossary in front of them, could understand this conversation. Thank you.
Councillor Martin, question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just a question through you to Councillor Doran, just on the change recommendation point 1 around non-compliance with setbacks. Just interested in, is it all of the setbacks? Is it one particular area? If you could sort of point to that point.
Happy to answer that, but can I, before doing that, because the answer will be dependent on whether or not my deemed refusal has been accepted or by the city officers. That was why we adjourned, wasn't it?
I'm happy for you to answer Councillor Martin's question, or choose not to at this stage. You have that right not to answer.
I'll be repeating myself in the future. There's multiple breaches of the setbacks. The RCPA is a prescriptive plan, not a performative plan. I know there are elements of it which the officers have reached their decision on. The one that is of most concern to me is to the northern boundary, which is the only boundary that actually interfaces with a residential community on this lot. It is a low-set, single-storey and two-storey townhouse development that sits on a equal land topography, if that's fair to the officers. This breaching of this setback, whilst I acknowledge that in that pod they could have gone higher, and I think that the applicant's done well to not go 6 to 8 levels, they're still breaching it by 2.5 metres of the 4 metres. And that's the only section of the land that, as I say, interfaces with residents, and therefore, as the Chair has sought in previous planning meetings, the impact on the community is that they will have structures closer to their boundary than was conceived under the pod.
So, I want to talk about that. I think we have a problem with point 2 at this time, that until we get clarification of advice from officers, it's difficult to include that in a refusal motion. And I'm interested in the committee's thoughts that until we get that further advice from officers, that really maybe should be something that is thrown up at full council instead. That I can't see how we could possibly vote on this today without having that further advice from officers yet. Councillor Young, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't possibly support that, even if it's completely accurate, without having that information before me and being able to demonstrate that I've got that information and able to rely upon. I think that I'd foreshadow a motion that we just lay this on the table.
So I think before we get to that, Councillor Doran, would you be happy to remove point 2 for now, and if need be, reintroduce it at full council once we have that additional information? Or would you prefer to completely remove your change recommendation this time?
Chair, I respect Councillor Young's and probably multiple members' views from reading the room that they want more information to be able to make an informed decision about the EPs. I acknowledge that I've probably got more information about it than they do, and I've raised some conflict with the planning team's views on the matter. I don't think that the change recommendation is worthy without it, because it is a key part, in my view, of why it doesn't comply, which is the reasoning which I'm using. I don't want to proceed with the change recommendation as it stands now without it. But if you remove it, I'll come back at full council with full information, assuming it does support the position that this will breach the 23,000. But I won't support the council's original recommendation.
So I'm going to propose at this time, I will foreshadow the officer recommendation in the knowledge that we have advice from the officers that they will provide additional detail in regards to the EP things before full council. So let's get that up first, that we foreshadow that to start with. And then I'm going to come back to Councillor Doran's change recommendation and see if there's a seconder or not.
Sorry, Councillor Young had already mentioned a foreshadowed motion.
So,
That was to lay this on the table before, and it doesn't require a seconder, but he did move.
Sorry, I didn't. Councillor Young, was it a foreshadow? Was it? I just heard.
Yeah, I indicated that I was prepared to move that as a foreshadow, and I identified it as a foreshadowed, yeah.
So we'll start with that foreshadowed motion first, unless Councillor Young, you wish to proceed with that.
Sorry, we haven't voted on the amendment.
I want to have it up first so there's clarity of what the path is, and then see if there's even a seconder, because we don't actually have a live motion at this stage.
But you don't second a foreshadowed motion?
No, but is Councillor Young wanting to put a foreshadowed motion up or not?
Yes, that the matter lay on the table for consideration at full council on whatever date.
Councillor Fowler?
I'm happy to second the...
There's no seconder for that yet.
No, sorry, the motion on the table. Happy to second it.
Councillor Doran's motion?
Correct.
Okay, so that's where we go back to the start then. So we go back to what is now a live motion with a seconder.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, Chair. Sorry. In that question you asked before about whether or not I would keep point 2, I made point to say that I don't believe the change recommendation is worthy without point 2. So if it's the view that we need to remove point 2 because the committee doesn't have enough information, I'll withdraw that original amended motion.
All right, so maybe we start with that. So can I get an indication from committee members that do they feel that's a fair point, that without that information it's really impossible to debate or vote on that motion?
Well, if the motion then is just to refuse it because of the non-compliance on setbacks,
that's what I'm removing it because it's only that, and I'll come back to
very
full council.
flimsy.
Okay, so we're going to remove point 2.
Remove the lot.
Remove the lot. Okay. So Councillor Doran formally withdraws his change recommendation, which now means it hasn't.
It was seconded by Councillor Fowler. So it's up to the council committee now whether that can be withdrawn.
Or we just vote it down, which is not what I was looking to do. So
He didn't wish to move it though.
no, he's withdrawn it. So is committee willing to accept the withdrawal of the motion that's on the table?
Yes.
Yeah. Do I need a procedural motion for that, Councillor Gates?
Yes.
All right. So a procedural motion that the motion is withdrawn, I'm guessing. I haven't done one of these before. I'm looking to you, Councillor Gates or Councillor Young. I have not had this before. Is a procedural motion to withdraw?
That committee supports the withdrawal of the...
Okay.
Because it becomes the property of the committee once it's seconded, just as I believe it becomes the property of full council in the same circumstances. So it then requires the committee to accept that it be withdrawn.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Right. Let's deal with that first.
I stand to be corrected, but I think that's the procedure.
I think we're safe. It's all on video. I think we're safe of it being clear what the committee's intent was.
I'll second that for you, Chairman.
proposed by Councillor Doran. Okay, so it's a procedural motion. We don't need a seconder on it. And just a vote on the procedural motion. All those in favour? Against? The procedural motion is carried. So Councillor Doran's motion is now off the table, and he may seek to reintroduce that at full council. The foreshadowed motion then becomes what we'll talk about next.
You need to move it. Not as foreshadowed.
That the matter is deferred for consideration full council on February 18th.
Okay, so so we're following along. So we'll vote in the foreshadowed, which then becomes the motion, and then if there is an amendment or another foreshadowed.
I think Councillor Young intends to move that as a motion now, not foreshadowed, because there's nothing on the table at the moment.
We need to,
so it becomes.
If there's nothing on the table, it becomes the motion.
It's a motion.
I'm happy to accept that. Okay, so I will move a foreshadowed motion of the officer's recommendation.
Okay, I'll second Councillor Young's motion. More information's always better.
Now, while we've made an absolute mess of this, Councillor Doran, Councillor Doran and I, when I told him that I would be supporting officer recommendation on this one, there was an amendment that was to be included. So once we've got that...
Is that foreshadowed motion correct? That's on the...
No, it's not. They're getting to it.
That's gone.
The officer recommendation. It's all right. It's okay. It's not just you trying to keep up. My head's buzzing too. Right.
You can just remove it is recommended.
Yeah. Councillor Doran, did you still wish to make an amendment on that one specific setback?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. And do the chamber support staff have that amendment? So Councillor Doran and I supplied an amendment to one condition or on the setbacks.
You can't speak to the foreshadowed motion until it...
I'm not speaking yet. I'm just getting the words up.
But how do you make an amendment to an officer recommendation?
I haven't made an amendment yet. This is just the full foreshadowed motion.
Oh, I thought you spoke about an amendment to it.
No, this is just the part of it. Okay, so the foreshadowed motion.
I'm confused.
The foreshadowed motion is on the screen. We go back to Councillor Young's motion first, which is to defer the item to full council on February 18th.
Yep.
So we will debate that and vote on that. Depending on its success or not success, we then come to my foreshadowed motion. Everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay.
And
so,
I'll just say I'd be prepared to support the foreshadowed motion, the officer's recommendation for approval, but I think this is a better option at this point in time not to go to council with a decision. Let it deal with an open
That's all right.
book.
So I'll take that as an open from Councillor Young on his motion. Is there anyone wishing to speak against Councillor Young's motion? Need to close, Councillor Young?
No, thanks.
Okay, so we'll take a vote on Councillor Young's motion to defer it to full council. All those in favour? This is to defer it to full council.
Sorry.
Cool. And then against? Right, so the motion is carried. The item is deferred to full council.
And in the interim, will be provided information to confirm the position about EPs.
Correct. Okay. We thank the good Councillor Doran for that little bit of fun. Officers, thank you very much. That is item 6.4 dealt with. That takes us to our last item of the day, 6.6.
I went on site and met with them.
Okay, last item of the day, Councillor Taylor is leaving us. Goodbye, Councillor Taylor. Item 6.6, over to you, officers.
Through the chair, good morning, councillors. This application is for another change to a development permit for a material change of use for 33 units at 216 the Esplanade, Burleigh Head. The change is subject to impact assessment. The site has an area of 1,012 square metres and a frontage of 20.1 metres to the Esplanade. It's identified within the high-density residential zone and has a building height overlay of 53 metres. To the west, the site adjoins neighbourhood centre zoning, comprising the newly constructed Sandbar Tower, which reaches a height of 26 stories and 82 metres. To the north and south, the site adjoins two 11-storey developments, being the Mediterranean Resort and the Sol Namara beachfront apartments. Notable features in the local context include the beachfront and Ocean Way immediately opposite, Gold Coast Highway to the west, Miami One shopping centre to the north, and the future Christine Avenue light rail station, which is currently under construction. The change application relates to a code tower which was originally approved in February 2023. It had a building height of 18 stories and 52.8 metres and setbacks of 2.7 to 4.6 metres to the north and 3.5 to 5.2 metres to the south. In July 2024, a minor change was approved to the code tower. The key changes related to an amended tower design, including amended side setbacks of 3.1 to 4.5 metres, reconfiguration of the ground floor and communal open space, and 3 additional car parking spaces. This change request seeks to increase the building height from 52.8 metres and 18 stories to 71.4 metres and 23 stories, triggering impact assessment as the development will exceed the code mapped height of 53 metres. As shown in the slide, the development proposes to retain the general layout and appearance of the approved code tower. In addition to the increase in building height, the change includes 5 additional units from 28 to 33, minor amendments to the ground plane, and minor amendments. The development will maintain the approved side setbacks of 3.1 to 4.5 metres, tower-based site cover of 71%, tower site cover of 53%, and 74 parking spaces comprising 68 resident spaces and 6 visitor spaces. Waste collection will continue to occur on-street, consistent with other towers along the Esplanade. This plan shows a level 1 floor plan, which features a single level unit. Ground floor. This plan shows a ground floor layout of the development. Vehicle access is located on the southern side, where the service vehicle standing area is identified. While one visitor space is located at the ground floor, the remaining are located within the basement. Deep planting areas at the site's frontage and planters at the northern side will accommodate a range of landscaping embellishments. The communal recreation area is located at the northern side and required services are located at the southern side. This plan shows a level 1 floor plan, which features a single level unit at the southern side and a void to the communal open space to the north. This plan shows a typical lower level floor plans from levels 2 to 13. These accommodate 2 units per floor. This plan shows a typical upper level floor plans from levels 14 to 20. These accommodate single level units. The development also features a split level penthouse at levels 21 and 22. During public notification, 17 submissions were received. 15 were properly made and 2 were not properly made. 10 of these were received from the western adjoining Sandbar Tower, 1 was received from the northern adjoining Mediterranean Resort, and 2 were received from the southern adjoining Sol Namara apartments. The key matters raised were height, ocean view obstructions for the Sandbar Tower, amenity impacts, shadowing, density and traffic, and that the change sought was a minor change rather than the required other change. Officers are satisfied the proposal has addressed these concerns in relation to compliance with the city plan benchmarks. A key consideration of the application was building height, where the proposal seeks a 35% uplift above the code height of 53 metres. City officers are satisfied that the proposed development complies with specific outcome 3.3.2.19 of the urban neighbourhoods element, which allows for the 50% increase in building height where the applicable criteria is met. The proposal reinforces the local identity. There are several developments in the local area which are above 53 metres, including the western adjoining Sandbar Tower, which is 82 metres in height. The proposal achieves a well-managed interface. It achieves appropriate building separation, includes privacy mechanisms, and provides a well-modulated facade. The proposal achieves an excellent standard of appearance by utilising a scallop design, distinct horizontal patterns, and high-quality materials and finishes. It promotes a varied, ordered and interesting skyline, made evident by the figure in the screen, which shows the development will provide a balance between the taller and wider sandbar to the west and the shorter, wider buildings to the north and south. The development also promotes housing choice in the context of this local coastal locality. Officers are also supportive of the height and setbacks as the proposal is responsive to the specific site circumstances. The site is adjoined by 3 larger allotments, all greater than 2,500 square metres and subject to established development. As illustrated in the figure, the side and rear setbacks achieve building separations of 8 metres at a pinch point to the wall line of the northern adjoining development, 17.1 metres to the balcony of the western adjoining sandbar, and 10.1 metres at a pinch point to the southern wall line of the adjoining 11-storey development. These building separations are commensurate to the scale of the relevant buildings, ensuring the development achieves a sense of openness around the buildings and allows for reasonable outlooks, natural light and ventilation. Therefore, the development is considered to maintain the appropriate level of amenity for adjoining residents expected within the high-density zone. Officers therefore recommend the application be approved subject conditions. Are there any questions?
Could I seek clarity in the matters raised by submitters? You mentioned, was it suggested that they thought it should have been a minor change instead of another change? Did I hear that incorrectly?
Yeah, that's right. I think there was some confusion on the application type.
Okay. But for all intents and purposes, the assessment would have been the same, but under the other change, there's public notification rights, which they were afforded.
Correct.
Okay. Just haven't heard that one raised before from the community.
Through you, Mr. Chair, probably just to clarify, when it's another change, we go back and assess it against the city plan again. The minor change is more of whether or not it's considered substantially different, so it is slightly different, but the key is the public notification for this one.
Yeah, so I mean, in the community's interest of it being an assessment against city plan and having public notification rights, the fact there was another change is a good thing for the community. I'm just not sure why they raised it as a concern. Do you have anything to add to that, Councillor Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I thought that was strange, but I actually think there perhaps was some confusion because there was a minor change previously to the code. So I think actually my read was they thought the minor change prior should have been another change rather than this other change being minor, which wouldn't have had any public notification. That's what I read it as.
Other questions? Councillor Marshall was up first and Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, just in relation to, I guess, the car parking, we've added, an extra 26 beds with the new proposal, but there's no change or increase in the car parking?
Yes, through the Chair. So the minor change application did increase the number of spaces by 3. However, that was compliant with the parking rate. With the additional density, it's still compliant. So they did have a surplus originally.
Any other questions?
No, that's fine. I guess my area, and this is not my division, this is Councillor Martin's division, but this area is really pushed for car parking, and I just think, 6 visitors parks for 140 beds is a concern, I think, for me, knowing that we're
Councillor Marshall, is there a question for officers?
Sorry, no.
Yeah. So I will ask the question on the back of where I think Councillor Marshall was going was, is this development at this proposal compliant with the city plan in regards to car parking for both residents and visitors?
Through the Chair, yes, the proposal is compliant. It's required to have 6 visitor spaces, which it provides, and 66 resident spaces. So they have 2 additional resident spaces.
Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. And I guess relating to that, follow on, like obviously through the last minor change, there was a surplus of parking, which is now tidied up with this other change, I suppose. Does that, in officer's view, does that sort of signal an intent that we were going to get to this point through that process around parking? Obviously, there was a surplus and a minor change.
Through the chair, I'm not too sure, to be honest. What we're looking at is whether it complies with the benchmarks at the time, and because they had that surplus, they still comply through this other change process.
Yep. I think it's a fair assumption, Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I just have a couple of questions that I'd like to discuss, and thanks, Chair, for the latitude here given. It's probably the first Burleigh in advance, so thank you in advance for some latitude. And noting this isn't a high density residential zone. Just on slide 15, we talked about setbacks. I wonder if we could go back. I guess I'm just seeking some clarity there around understanding that there's good separation, 10 metres close to around the buildings, but I note that it heavily relies on probably the neighbouring property, that are carrying that setback load. Because on this site, I think to the north, it's only around 3 metres, but the neighbour has 6. On the southern side, it's sort of 3 or 4, and it's another 6 or 7. My concern with that is, how is that equitable and fair? And would we run into a situation where those neighbouring developments, how would we limit them from being 3 metres and then we end up with a very, very close setback?
Through the chair, the proposal doesn't comply with the AOs in terms of setback, so it becomes a performance outcome. In terms of the benchmarks, it's ensuring that the amenity is protected for those adjoining users. In these circumstances, the subject site is bounded by 3 larger allotments with very established developments. It's not considered that those would redevelop in the near future, essentially. And I guess if they were to redevelop, we're confident that because of the size of those sites, that they could provide sufficient separation to ensure that they get appropriate separations in terms of the high density zoning and the city block formation.
Would you just mind quickly, so while Councillor Martin was referencing setbacks, there's also separate provisions for separation between buildings, and that particular benchmark doesn't require that it be equal between the 2 towers in terms of distance from boundary. It just refers to the amenity impacts of the separation between buildings being the most important part.
Yeah, through the chair, in terms of, I guess, the setback separation in isolation, it talks about the amenity to adjacent uses. In these circumstances, officers are satisfied that the separation achieved at those pinch points is appropriate.
So, thanks, Chair. Follow on from that, I don't know, it's probably unlikely that those larger lots are redeveloped soon, but so everyone wants to move to the Gold Coast at the moment. So if that, say that southern side were to redevelop, are we on strong footing that that development wouldn't be able to be given a similar 3 metre setback, because that would see us with an unacceptable, I guess, separation? And would we be on strong footing to work with a future applicant that it is not, it's not a precedence that we're not setting, that a future development would need to retain that separation? So I suppose, can we do that, and are we unfairly limiting neighbouring properties with approving this setback?
Through the chair, in terms of, I guess, if a similar outcome was to be proposed on one of the adjoining sites, it really just depends on what that built form outcome was like, without, I guess, seeing a specific proposal and what it looks like and what the separation distance are going to be. It's a difficult question to answer at this time. In terms of if an application was lodged on those adjoining lots, that would be subject to its own assessment.
Okay, thank you. Somewhat related, but just site cover. I noticed this, it's a relatively small site in and amongst some really large sites. It's about 1,000 square metres, but the ground floor and level 1 is around 70% site cover. I know we don't have I talk about it quite often, but that wedding cake sort of visual, which I think sort of shows the departure from the AO, but given the height and the uplift, is site cover, especially at ground and level 1, equivalent to similar buildings of such height, or is this quite a large site cover for the height?
I mean, sorry, see the chair. That's also a difficult question to answer. I mean, in terms of recent towers, noting that lot sizes are generally a lot smaller, there's less land available, so site cover, I mean, has increased. For this specific proposal, we're satisfied that the site cover at the ground level being 71% is appropriate because it contributes to the neighbourhood character. They're able to provide appropriate landscaping embellishments. It also achieves that narrow, slender tower form as well.
Yeah. And the question I've got from community, especially in these areas on the coastal locations where they're neighbouring buildings, is, why don't we get landscaping and pools and tennis courts now? It's a part of our DA. So I'm wondering if you just sort of elaborate on that, why we're not getting that site cover and that outcome with land when they compare it to other buildings with tennis courts and landscaping and pools.
Through the chair, in this circumstance, this specific development does comply with the communal open space provisions. In terms of providing those amenities, I think it's really just dependent on the size of the allotment. Obviously, this location, it's quite sought after, and unfortunately there's not enough room to provide those amenities.
Chair, and just I noticed in the report it talked about, and I think it's relevant to all councillors because we're getting more sort of boundary planter boxes, and I noticed it was in the Robina application. There was talk of a specific condition around management plans of planter boxes, that something would be specifically conditioned, but I just wonder if you could elaborate on what that means in terms of not sort of burdening the neighbours, or that there is a plan to service boundary planters at zero setback.
Through the chair, is that in terms of the maintenance of the planters? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's essentially just so that the body corporate maintains those and ensures their viability.
Okay, so it doesn't sort of outline how they get there over fences, or how they work with points or neighbouring access or anything like that. It's just that they must maintain, so we end up with green spaces.
Yeah, through the chair, that's generally something that landscape assessment does have a look at. In this circumstance, all the planters are quite accessible. Other developments, I guess, where it's a bit more difficult, we do request for that information and to detail how those planters are maintained.
Chair, and probably the final one is landscaping. Just I noticed there is a great opportunity for deep planting at the front of the building, but noting there's no ability for street trees because along the Esplanade and the footpath. Just wondering how many deep plantings there are in that frontage around shade trees that we might condition.
Through the chair, in terms of what's currently proposed in the SLI, there is some deep planting at the site's frontage, and that's been accommodated by the basement being set back 1.7 metres, so there is natural ground for planting. In this other change proposal as well, those services at the frontage, they've also been orientated 90 degrees now, so it limits that hard stand along the frontage. In terms of what's in the SLI, currently recommended is a canopy pandanus tree on the southern side garden bed, just south of the pedestrian entrance, and on the northern side bed is a frangipani tree as well as a cabbage palm.
Thank you, Chair.
I might yield. I had a couple first, and I'll come to Councillor Doran. Do you have shadow impact diagrams in the presentation?
Through the chair, I do.
Seeing as there was a key matter raised by submitters, I'd like to see the shadow diagrams.
Through the chair, this is the worst case scenario, so this just provides a comparison of the approved tower as well as the proposed height increase. In terms of the impacts, noting that the setbacks are consistent, the actual width of the shadow is consistent, while it is longer because of the additional building height, it does continue to move throughout the day.
So the other question I had was in regards to the visitor arrangements. There's been a couple applications recently where we've included some requirements around that when the visitor car parking is in the basement, that there be signage up the front and a lighting system to be able to tell people if there's a visitor bay available, or a loop system. Have we included that in this one?
Through the chair, I'm not too sure if it's specific on the lighting. How I can look into that.
Yeah. So, Councillor Martin, maybe, because I think the last one we did something on this too in Palm Beach, like where we said, okay, well, it's good that it's there, but how do people actually use it? And I think we added an intercom and had a lighting system so that you didn't have people driving to the basement to see the visitor spaces full. That could be dealt with. Maybe that's something before full council to look at.
Through the chair, Councillor Hummel, condition 12 actually does go into a little bit of detail about signage, etc., for visitor spaces.
Does it have that? So signage is fine. Does it have the lighting set up?
Signage and line marking indicating visitor parking, just reversing in, basically directional requirements for how they find visitor parking.
So we might review that, because to me, having people drive into a basement just to find out all 3 visitor spots are full, or however many there is, doesn't make any sense, when for a simple closed loop system with a little amber light up the top saying visitor space is full addresses that, especially because I'm guessing the basement will be behind a gate, most likely. So, Councillor Martin, maybe before full council, we look at the same conditions we apply to that one in Palm Beach. We add that here. Councillor Dora, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I note that yourself and Councillor Marshall have stolen my thunder on parking today. But just a quick question. This is a generic question probably to the Director. In relation to the parking supply, I sort of share Councillor Marshall's hesitations, whilst I note that's acceptable outcome. Is the light rail a factor in the original ratio setting for this area?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it's not. The city plan parking rates have specific tables and parking rates that apply to light rail areas. This one isn't one of those rates.
Councillor Martin, another question?
Thanks, Chair. And just page 282, like I know that the objections around views were raised, but it's not part of the city plan. But I guess it's the southern neighbours, the interface on page 282, that I perhaps am most concerned with, just way the southern building is oriented and the application is set forward, that it does block quite a lot of that amenity to the south. Yeah, I don't know whether you've got a picture, but I just wonder, those balconies obviously lose a significant angle of their views, and I'm just wondering how that privacy amenity would be protected sufficiently, and whether there is a large portion of view that is affected by the setbacks, how that's a consideration on those southern neighbours.
Through the chair, in terms of the privacy mechanisms, the proposal does provide privacy screening up until the top of those 11-storey buildings. In this case, that separation of 10.1 metres to the southern side was considered appropriate. I mean, in terms of their outlooks, they do still have unencumbered eastern view outlooks to the ocean. It's also noted that the 2 submissions that were received from the southern adjoining development didn't raise setbacks or site separation as a matter.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you. That's a good explanation. And I understand that this uplift is essentially above the height of the neighbours anyway. But obviously, I didn't see this. This was prior to my time and didn't come to committee. So just interested in understanding. I suppose, Chair, I just looking through the conditions. I think the landscaping outcome is really good, like the courtyard facade, the entry, what officers have been able to achieve on ground floor interface has been really good in terms of working that through. But I guess I just feel a bit more comfortable, especially given we can't have a street tree on the verge, that we, as part of condition 10, I think, which is landscaping, that we just set that there's a minimum number of established trees, so we get those shade trees.
You're looking to move the item and make an amendment?
I'm looking to make an amendment to that condition.
So I'm happy to move it. I'll move the recommendation, and then we'll look to Councillor Martin for an amendment, which I believe has been supplied to Chamber support.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, I'm happy to put it to you.
We'll let her get up first. That's right. We'll get to that. So, so it's in regards to this condition. So it achieves what Councillor Martin is seeking to achieve, that instead of it being part of the future OPW assessment by landscaping, it explicitly calls it out in the conditions at this time that there are to be 3 trees and the minimum size of them. Councillor Martin, does that address the concern you were looking for?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's what I'd be looking for to be included, which still is in line with the landscape intent, but provides Council some reassurance that that will be delivered.
Okay. So I'm going to go back and check there's no other questions before we move to debate. Any other questions of officers on this item? In that case, I have moved it. Or question, Councillor Gates?
Indicated there are existing palm trees right along the Esplanade.
Through the chair, the frontage at the moment is 20.1 metres. The reason that street trees weren't conditioned as part of this one is because there wasn't sufficient clearance between the crossover and the power pole, that's existing. There's also gas main infrastructure in the road reserve.
Councillor Young?
So elsewhere it appears that the lighting and the poles have been modified in the street, and yet outside this site we're just going to have the old poles, which therefore limits the ability to put in trees. I think at the human level we're really missing an opportunity here to make an appealing presence, and what is evident in the street, not that I'm that familiar with it, is palm trees all along from the north of this site in the street verge that really contribute to that human kind of interface. And I can't see any good reason why we can't accommodate trees out the front of this building. If it means the power poles and lines are going to be put underground, then so be it.
So can I seek clarity from officers? Would that actually achieve that outcome, or is this more to do with the distance between the VXO and other infrastructure that means even if the power lines were underground, there can't be a tree?
That's correct, through the chair, sorry. There's a gas main that runs in the road verge.
Okay. So even if the power pole wasn't there can't be a tree planted in this location?
I don't believe so, but we can probably get further advice on that.
Right. So we can seek clarity on that between now and full council. Councillor Young. Any other questions? Last call. In that case, I have moved a recommendation with the suggested amendment from Councillor Martin. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor, happy to second? Happy to second with the amendment.
I'm happy to second if you've included that landscaping change.
Yeah, that's with the amendment. Yeah. Councillor Martin's happy to second the recommendation. I'm going to open debate just very briefly that while I know it is confusing for the community and for council as well, when an application goes through a code approval, then a minor change, then another change, that is legal under Queensland planning legislation. It does make it difficult for the community to be part of the journey on it, but it is legal. I appreciate on this one that from the code-approved building to what we have here today, there's been very little change in terms of floor plate and whatnot. The floor plate was amended during the minor change, but the other change is all about the height on top and some ground plane changes. I'm confident that given the rather large properties that the 3 surrounding towers sit on, that the separation we get to pinch points, and the diagram that was up on the screen only refers to the closest pinch point. Once you move away from those, it actually becomes quite a generous separation that most towers in the city we'd love to have them that big all the time. So I'm very happy to support this. However, I think the inclusion of Councillor Martin's point is really good, that if we refer to that ground interface, as Councillor Young referred to it as, that is a critical area that we should consider the impact of, and that making it explicitly clear that tree species that be planted in that deep planting area and the size of them goes a long way to helping with that. Does anyone wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Martin, as Divisional Councillor, do you wish to contribute to the matter?
Thanks, Chair, for I think including that provision. Obviously, landscape when we're getting increased height, landscaping at the ground level is really important to the community. Doing everything we can to make sure that softens the impact. Noting it's in a high density residential zone, but I thank officers for the work they've done on improving the connection. And I just obviously we discussed. I think it would be a good improvement to make sure we get the best in class parking management system that we can apply for future developments where there's single lanes and limited parking underneath. So looking forward to seeing how that can be progressed ahead of council. And thank you for the presentation.
Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. Councillors, I don't have any GBI items that have been presented to me. Is there anything that anyone wishes to raise? That being the case,
Sorry, Chair, and it only occurred to me through the committee. Just really a question.
Yeah.
Usually, like last time at this point in the year, we had special delegation items, and I just wondered if there were any decided under special delegation, or whether that will come to council in the previous period.
Madam EGM.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Martin, there was no special delegations during the Christmas recess or over that period since last full council.
He says with a grin. Meeting closed 11:21.